Welcome, everybody, to Navigating Change, the podcast from Tybal Inc. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm here with, once again, Howard Tybal.
I am now in a better place. Actually, I was in a great place last time.
Now you're in a better place? Are you on an island?
Well, no, I'm just saying I'm not sitting in my car.
Well, that's good. Once in a blue moon, but I'll tell you, you can't tell. You sound great wherever you are.
Now, you've got the whole system. If people could see what the mechanics and the technology you have in that space age, Pete Wright little cabin in the woods.
I call it the lander. This is the lander.
The lander.
The lem. Join me in the lem. Hey, we're talking about Sweet Briar today. What an interesting conversation this is. This has turned out to be in the marketplace of education. Before we get to that, though, head over to tybalinc.com, learn a little bit more about the show, find us, subscribe for free in iTunes or on our email mailing list, and connect with Howard at Howard Tybal on Twitter, or you can find Tybal Inc. on LinkedIn. We would love to connect with you in either of those places. So that's that. Old business out of the way. Why is Sweet Briar bubbling up again for us, Howard?
Well, yeah, I did mention I wanted to talk about this, and what I think is worth noting. Probably a month ago, I was maybe a little bit longer. I had the privilege of sitting in and listening to a talk at the AGB Trusteeship Conference in Phoenix. And it was a dialogue and a panel about this very topic. And there were some really engaged members of the audience that had tremendous knowledge, too, of the background was going on. And I think what's happening over time, and there was a lot of speculation. There was a recognition, one, that this was in the courts, although we didn't quite know where that would lead. More information has come out about this trust, and whether it's the New York Times, the Washington Post. We've got a recent article or editorial written by a former board member telling the story about I think this just came out yesterday or today.
As we're recording this today, yeah.
Okay, today, exactly. Sweet Briar's leaders didn't kill off the school, external forces did. And that was now, if you're skeptical, if you're cynical, you're saying, of course, that's what a former board member is going to say. And then tomorrow is, I think, the hearing on the Sweet Briar that's going to be in the court. So we're still in the middle of where is this going, although, this is now May, whatever date it is, and they're coming up on their commencement. And what did you read to me, Pete?
Their commencement just happened, and on May 16th, amid hugs and cheers and smiles and tears, 132 undergrads and 6 grad students walked across the stage at Sweet Briar's 106th and possibly last commencement.
Right. So there you go. This idea that possibly last commencement. I think that there are, listen, if you care as deeply about that school, in the way I know that anyone listening to this cares deeply about their school, you're going to hold on to hope as long as you can that maybe there's a way out of this one. What's relevant for me about this, and I think in the work that those that are guiding institutions, whether it's faculty or administrators or trustees or presidents, is that this is becoming the kind of story that's allowing more institutions to say, let's take our head. If our head was a little bit in the sand, let's peek out a little further. If our head has been completely in the sand, let's dig ourselves out and have some of the tough conversations. And I am convinced, because when I'm traveling and I have a slide where I show a picture of these 2 women hugging each other, and it's talking about Sweet Briar's demise, and it was right after it happened. And I will make the statement that, whether it's all these other challenges or this recent incident with a school that nobody saw it coming, it wasn't on anybody's watch list, and all of a sudden the board made the choice. I think that there's this presumption that the board acted hastily without any evidence, without any data, and I think over time we're going to find that the story has a lot of nuance in it as we hear more and more board members. I'm just going to read one thing that Diane Dalton wrote. And she wrote, "It's important to note as well that the reductions in administrative staff were a response to Sweet Briar's growing financial problems, and were identified in collaboration with faculty and staff and approved by the board." So that is an example for me that that we need to, as observers, begin to step back and continue to gather information and listen and learn about what really happened here. Were the faculty involved in a way that is suggested in here? She claims that, where was this, Pete? She said 800 faculty members. What was it again?
Yeah, she says nearly 800 people, including members of the board, campus community, and alumni, were fully involved in the strategic planning process, or planning exercise that led to the, quote, plan for sustainable excellence. What I don't know about the plan for sustainable excellence is that the thing that effectively closed the school, or is that the plan that happened in 2001, through 2006
right.
to help get the school back on board? Because by all rights, this was a school that was certainly in endowment trouble long ago.
Yes. Where we are right now with this, and my guess is when people are listening to this podcast, we're going to even have more information, is that this is an opportunity to step back and go, what does this teach us? And I think there's multiple lessons here. One lesson is that having the conversation around the worst case scenario, in most likely case, and best case scenario, we need to have those conversations more authentically and more explicitly as leaders. So I was in a conversation with a president actually today, and he was relating to me that, we're talking about having me come and lead some kind of board gathering with their senior leadership. And he was very, very honest about the fact that we're not having the brutal facts conversation. We have it indirectly. We make assumptions about what each other knows, but we don't put on the table what we understand to be the facts about what are going on. I think Sweet Briar, one lesson is that we should have and give each other more permission to have the tough conversation. And the dilemma for this, the reason why we don't do it, is I think most of us are afraid if we have the conversation, it opens the door to it increasing the likelihood that we're going to go down that path. And we're either going to find ourselves in the 11th hour going, oh my God, we're there, and we have to make a decision now, but we didn't really talk about it. Or we either trust that talking about it doesn't mean we're going to necessarily act on it, but we're going to have more and better information to decide together what's the right thing to do. I do believe the trustees did what they thought was right for their situation. This one statement by Diane, I think, summed it up. Despite our collective passionate belief in the power of women's education, this belief was not enough to enable Sweet Briar to attract and retain the number of students it needed to survive, much less thrive. So you take that, Pete, what Diane just talked about, and you also add into this what was in the Atlantic today in this article, The Unfortunate Fate of Sweet Briar's Professors. And why don't you just read that quote that is in that article?
This is from John Castine, who's an associate professor of poetry, and in the process of this conversation, he highlights that 6 years ago, Forbes had listed the college as being one of the most unstable financial situations private colleges in the U.S., and he says it is impossible to say that any of us lacked information to understand how dire the situation was. At the same time, not a single person thought there was any possibility that the college was going to close at the end of this year. It was very abrupt, a huge surprise.
So that should say everything to us, because if you are observing this and you've got any connection to higher education, you can only imagine what it would be like for a faculty member to wake up one day and hear this news. This is in the realm of impossible. And at the same time, what I find so compelling about that quote is that he also started by saying, we can't pretend we didn't know we were in a hard place. But guess what? So many of our peers are in a hard place. And we assumed that going forward that they would figure it out. And what the board did, right or wrong, and so I think that forever we're going to have people on the campus saying what they did was wrong, and others that are going to say they did their job, is that they did not keep the place open in the absence of saying we have a plan that can make this place viable, vibrant, and that there's a quote that I heard in this panel that spoke at AGB, and it was that survival is not a mission. And I'll tell you something, that's a statement that so many institutions have got to be sitting with, saying, if they're honest with themselves, if survival is not a mission, then what are we doing? And right. I'm not saying they're not doing something, there's keeping the trains running and filling the next year's class. But if you don't have an answer to this is where we want to go in response to some of the challenges we're having, whether you're an all women's or all men's school, that's an additional constraint that they have. But there are enough middle tier, I'll just pick on, unfortunately, they're always picked on in these conversations, the liberal arts institutions, but those middle tier institutions that rely heavily on their tuition, don't have huge endowments, and if survival is not a mission, then do we really have a mission that we can look back and say 20 years from now, or even 10 years from now, we can see where we're going? And that, to me, is the work that we have in front of us, is to figure out how to have those right conversations with the faculty, with the administration, and with the boards, all together in a room, having a shared conversation around this. This is where this has to go. They cannot, one of not Sweet Briar's, but all of higher education's failure is that we don't do a good enough job involving these three constituencies in a shared conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. It's funny, you started out this thing saying that, of the lessons from Sweet Briar, and lesson 1 was give ourselves permission to have the brutal facts conversation more publicly. And I feel like we started with lesson 1, and in fact, lesson 5 is also that too. Lessons 2 through 5 is give ourselves that permission. The economic impact, I think, is what raises the sort of eyebrow. The challenges they're having, obviously, in the courts, the challenges because Amherst County boasts Sweet Briar as being one of the largest employers in the area.
Yes. The ripple effect is huge.
It is, and you just made that point that really struck home to me, that when you're working at a particularly at a university, right? Universities are institutions. They are brick and mortar foundation that represent something so grand in their local community and beyond. Yes. You never imagined that this place with these beautiful facilities would possibly risk closing. Obviously, it'll be here forever. That's just how you think, I think, when you're there. So I can really relate to it. And I think the other sad point that I wanted to make is it is so easy for us outside of the Sweet Briar institution to jump on one bandwagon or the other and say, well, they didn't have enough information. They had too much. They had all the information they ever needed. The bottom line is, I think a point you made, we won't really know. We won't really know the kinds of conversations that they had. No. All we know is that they were incredibly difficult.
There are people out there, it's a harder thing to say this, that considers what that leadership did, that those trustees courageous. And that's something that will not be spoken publicly, because is it courageous to affect people's lives in such a negative way? Mm-hmm. The answer in many ways is no. That's not what I'm pointing to. What I'm talking about being courageous about saying is what's right for the institution. Are we going to continue on a slow decline in the absence of having a genuine plan to get us out of it? Or are we going to bite the bullet and say we know what's going on? I'm telling you, there's schools out there right now that should be having this conversation, even if they choose. We are not going there, but we can say we had the conversation. That's the power of the Sweet Briar story, is that people should be able to say, we're not closing, we're not merging, but we had the conversation.
Right.
And that in itself demonstrates your commitment, then, what you are willing to do.
I think that is a really great assessment. I frankly, I hope they figure it out. I hope they figure out how to come. I hope the campaigns like SavingSweetBriar.com, this alumni campaign, I hope they're able to figure it out. But it is certainly becoming, as you say, more and more clear that more and more institutions are having this conversation, or should.
And I'll tell you something, Pete, if they can't figure it out, I have this workshop on change, and I have a presumption. This is not 100% true, but in no way is life 100%. You can't avoid the bad in life. I don't care who you are, but I have a presumption that most people will land on their feet. And if it does go through closing and faculty members are at a point where they still want to teach, they will find a way to do this. Now, I'm not minimizing the hardship this might cause, but most of us, in the face of adversity, will step up, and then down the road we'll look back and say, that was a painful lesson, and it was a painful thing to go through, and I'm in a good or better place. I choose to think that way. Not everybody lands in that place, and that's that is the reality of life. That's what I'm hoping for anybody that's affected by Sweet Briar, is that they take that point of view forward. Because this is a skill set we all have to get better at. Because I don't think we're out of the woods on this one. I think this is the beginning of an accelerating kind of change, where the schools that are willing to invest themselves in really looking at themselves honestly and saying, how do we want to grow? They will survive. The schools that keep their head in the sand and are not willing to have the honest conversations, they're at risk of falling into the same demise that happened to Sweet Briar. So I think that we have to not only put our best foot forward, but we have to recognize that and hopefully support each other to not let adversity cause us to think that we can't land on our 2 feet, because I think most people do. Excellent
way to close, Howard. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I appreciate this conversation with you. It helps me just to be able to think about these things out loud.
Me too. Hope everybody else got some of these same great lessons, particularly lesson 1, which was repeated a number of times. And head over to TeibelInc.com, learn more about us on the show. Thank you so much. Reach out to us at Howard Teibel on Twitter, or I'm at Pete Wright. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Sweet Briar. And we should be able to say in a coming episode, we'll do just a brief recap, because we'll know more in the coming days about how this is all going to shake out. It should be a very interesting next month. So thanks, everybody. And we'll catch you next week on Navigating Change, the podcast from Teibel Inc.